Welcome to the last and final. I hope it is as happy for you as it's been for me in preparing it. And I have been a wild man for 5 days because this final lesson was what can we do? Assuming that you came here not just to be entertained or even just to be informed, but that you came wondering how you can be a better citizen and help according to your circumstances and resources. And when you read what can we do, I got all the suggestions you can handle. I still have 2 full boxes of these plus the ones that are over there out in my garage, and I may not live to distribute them all. So if any of you will distribute one or more, as I said before, don't give it to some neighbor that will put it on a shelf. If you give it to an individual, get their promise that they'll read at least the first 10 pages. After that, they either know whether... But to legislators, school people, teachers, anybody connected with education, whether they hate it or whether they like it, they should know it. Because no honest person can read this book and go away without knowing that the federal government has taken over our education, turned it over to a private organization who is now redoing the textbooks and the teaching in school to train our children no longer to be loyal to the United States Constitution, but to be citizens of the world under the United Nations, and many other things that won't tell you everything the book says right now. I think what I'll do is take up what can we do first. That's what we came here for tonight. And because I put so much of it on paper, we may not have to spend all the time that I normally would have done. What can we do? I think lines out very clearly what you can do. Over here, now since this is 30, 40 years old, back here I list some publications that at that time were very informative, and most of them don't exist anymore. But on this other, I have given you a list of many publications and organizations that I now am a member of or subscribe to, and you can take your pick. I particularly recommend the book, The Law. President Benson has urged everybody to read this book. The finest exposition of what I've been teaching that you could ever find in a book like this. And it's only one chapter in this book by Frederick Bastiat of selected articles on freedom. Bastiat died when he was 40 years old in 1850. And so up to that time, it's somewhat like the Old Testament. It's true, it's good, we need it, but it doesn't know anything about 4 days of civilian rule, property taxes, or anything like that. So we need the New Testament and the Book of Mormon to go with it. But this book, many of them have been given away free. I think there's a small charge for them now. I don't know whether somebody want to go in together and order much, but the address and the online information is given so you could get the information, and if you want to do anything about it, you can. But to start out with the government being organized to protect our life, liberty, and property. And incidentally, Ezra Taft Benson's great book on the 200th anniversary of the Constitution, Heavenly Banner, when he gets down at the last, he starts out with the protection of our life, liberty, and property. Now, I happened to pick up the teachings of the prophet Joseph Smith, and I just happened to turn over here, and I came to where he wrote his belief on the Constitution of the United States. He sent it to people in England, and he started out the same way: life, liberty, and property. It's amazing. Interesting to me, he wrote that on March the 29th, And on March 29th, I began studying for this lesson. And March 29th was the day that the book was released. It's coincidence, March 29th has become dear to me. These 3 books by Bastia are absolutely amazing. Selected essays on political economy. The first one is what is seen and what is not seen, extremely fundamental principle, and I've given you a paper giving you most of that. The next one is Economic Harmonies, beautiful harmonizing the principle of the gospel. Now, he believes in God very thoroughly. He's well read in the Bible. You can tell it. For 1850, he was fine. The one thing he didn't know was anything about Satan. He emphasized time again evil tendencies of people, even influences. He did not realize that Satan is standing right at the side doing his work, so as far as he knew. And the last book, which I couldn't find, Economic Sophisms. He takes the fallacies in a gentle, friendly way. He just blows them to bits. I just enjoy it so much. Fundamental principle. Start here, don't we? Always stands before us, established hands of wise man whom God raised up. To Ezra Taft Benson, to all who have discerning eyes, it is apparent that the Republican form of government established by our noble fathers cannot endure once fundamental principles are abandoned. See how basic this thing is all the way through. Momentum is gathering for another conflict, a repetition of the crisis of 200 years ago. This collision of ideas is worldwide. The issue is the same that precipitated the great premortal war. Will men be free to determine their own course of action, or must they be forced? Again, fundamental principle, to know that all we have came from God. In what you say in your prayer on, again, it's the war of heaven, it's a war between Christ and Satan's form of force, government. Government, you have to say what is good about government, because without government we would have total anarchy. So even a dictatorship is better than no government at all. And we see this by entropy. Third, another bullet I told you before, the word entropy means the natural progression of anything wrong that leads to its destruction. And that's true in science. In fact, it's mostly used in science, but it also applies to religion or morals. But anything wrong, contrary to that given by God, has within it the seeds of its own destruction. And no matter how beautiful public education may look for the first 100 years or the first many years, and no matter how many improvements can be made as they try to patch it as they go, it will be to the point, and it will come to the United States, if it's not stopped, where we'll either have dictatorship, which will stop it, or it will frazzle to pieces with anarchy, as among the Nephites when the government was completely overthrown and they just broke up into tribes and families, stealing from one another, fighting each other. Again, fundamental principles to remember that this is a battle against Satan and all of his evil things, and God and liberty and the great blessings that come when men are free to act in their own self-interest. When they do that which is best for them, they do it by doing what is best for everybody else. If I'm in the cabinet business and I don't give a hoot about my subcontractors or my customers, I won't be in the cabinet business. The more I can improve that product, the better I can serve, the quicker I do, the more money I'm going to make. Selfish, not selfish, self self-interest, because every one of them has self-interest the same way. When we organized the Mesa Constitution Celebration Committee in the 200th anniversary back in 1987, I went to the city council and showed them the government regulations and said, the government said the city should be celebrating this. Great idea, you do it. So I became the chairman of it for many, many years. At any rate, we had the great Centennial Hall, and we had 2,000 people. We had government officials and military people from Williams Field, had a tremendous program. But all along the hall we had these folks, and I put two of them. But I started out with Happy Birthday Constitution. Now bring them up as fast as you can. Constitution is the key to the future. If we do not save the Constitution of the United States, we do not save the United States. One of the principles is the separation of powers, executive, legislative, judicial, national, state, and local. And as long as they're kept separate, we're going fine. Whenever the executive takes over legislative acts, whenever the federal government takes over city police operations or education and else, then you're going to have trouble. Limited government. And that you can do quickly. What is the purpose of government? To protect. What is the thing that government shouldn't do? Provide. All right. And the checks and balances, that when Congress does what it needs to do, it prevents the president and the Supreme Court from doing what they shouldn't do. And the same way, and also that works from top to bottom. The right to keep and bear arms, and I'm going to mention that a little because the effort to disarm the United States militarily and the effort to get the guns away from the people is a heavy program that's going on day and night, powerful as it can. We all need to be aware of it and to resist it in any way we can. Well, we've already said we don't have freedom of religion anymore. And when we say freedom, back in those days, I didn't quite understand the difference between agency and freedom and agency and liberties and permissions. So the fact that I use freedom freely here is you'll understand what it is. Freedom of religion is freedom of life. Freedom of property rights is the second leg on the stool. Freedom of speech and freedom of the press is freedom of liberty to do what we should do. I want to emphasize this because of the many things that I tell you that you can and should do is be aware of your duty to serve on a jury if called, and what your duty is if you are called, because it's entirely different from what the judge and the prosecutor and the attorney will tell you. The jury system has been turned upside down, and as a citizen you need to know it. So I have given you much material on the jury system back there. This one is just the first chapter of the book Trial by Jury, which is the finest exposition of a jury ever written. It is a classic. But if you've read the first chapter, you don't need to read the rest, because the rest is just proving that the first chapter is true. So when you have this, you have all that you need to know about the primary function of juries and the duty of it. But you also need to know how juries are administered and operated in our day and time, and that's on the material I've given you back there. I'll just repeat what I said here, but the effort to disarm us, have a blue booklet, very few pages, on a peaceful world without arms, and it's an official document of the United States State Department, ratified by the United Nations, a plan in which they thought within 50 years they could get the United States free of all military. They would have Cubans or Mongolians in here for police force, you know, that would mean to the women and the property and so forth. But our troops would be turned over to the United Nations, and they would be pushed in endless, windless wars all over the world. J. Reuben Clark, endless, windless wars. And the Chinese would shed the blood of Americans. You know that China is today the greatest enemy of the United States of America. It's buying up its property by the $1 billion. China now largely controls much of our money supply. If they were to pull their money out like this, we could have a depression that would make the 1931 look childish. We are almost in the hands of communist China because we have been betrayed by treason by at least 2 of our presidents. I'm not going to mention them, but if you study, you'll know who they were, who turned over our nuclear facilities to the Chinese and who have provided them with much material and information. They say, well, why would people in the United States do that? Won't they suffer the same as the rest? Well, they think they're part of a huge program that when the United Nations takes over, they will be among the chiefs. Now, another thing is that, and I'll get to that later, the Rockefeller interests who are behind most everything else also push this program, not in their name, but they promote it and push it because they want this country disarmed for other reasons. We've had a tremendous propaganda campaign on why we should get rid of our arms, that if arms are taken away from all the nations, nobody could fight. And if they're turned over to the peacekeeping United Nations, then there could be no wars because they would not allow any military force in another country, and because they're peacekeeping, they wouldn't conquer Albania or anybody. No, would they? I'm not going to. I'll mention Panama Canal here because it's one of the things there, and if I mention it now, I might have it again. But there was a determined effort proposed by the communists years before in which we would give away the communist, or the Panama Canal, land that we purchased and owned, and a canal that we built with our own money and operated our own forces, turn over to communist-controlled Panamanian government. Terrible thing. Now the other thing is personal gun control. Every time there's a killing, either a child accidental or criminal shooting something, then the newspapers turn on the press. We've got to get rid of all the guns to stop these shootings. Well, if they take away the guns from all the citizens who would never use them wrongfully, who will have the guns? Only the criminals, because they don't obey the law anyway and would not turn their guns in. And then, knowing that you don't have a gun in your house, they feel free to enter whenever they want to. And many criminals said that if they have evidence that people have guns, they go to the next house where they don't have guns. The people that have guns are doing a great deal to preserve your freedom that you or I might not realize or appreciate. Then any form, you remember that 6 months ago there was an 18-year-old young man. He was crazed on drugs and he was fighting the police, pulled a knife, and the police used a stun gun to put him unconscious. As a result of that stun gun and maybe all the drugs and everything taking, he died. Oh boy, did the ACLU move in on that one. Oh boy. And the press, the press you can always count on anything that's against us, why you can count on the press moving right in. Because let me tell you something, ahead of the Rockefellers control your Mesa Tribune. They own and control, they own stock in 40% of the major newspapers and television stations in this country, because Rockefellers own most of the money in this world. You ever hear of the Chase Bank? Now, I had been banking with Bank One, and I liked it. Well, suddenly I noticed that Chase had purchased the Bank One. The next thing I noticed is that my costs for everything had risen. The Rockefellers are making interest on all of the deposits in most of the banks in the United States. They have so much money they don't know what to do with it. The Rockefellers own 140 palaces in 140 places in this. They have an airplane at any one that they can scoot any place in the world they want to go. They have airplanes. They have paid servants working in all those houses, operating those airplanes at their beck and call. They control most of the money, and they are drawing interest on most of the deposits in banks. And most of the money in banks does not exist. It's just out of the air. Mr. Tanner goes down and borrows $20,000 to operate his pigeon business. Does anybody put $20,000 in the bank and say this belongs to him? They take a piece of paper and write, Wayne Tanner owes us $20,000 at 6% interest. And Wayne Tanner being paid interest on money that is only an entry on a piece of paper. And this is arranged by the Rockefellers through the Federal Reserve banking system, which they own and control. Oh, I'm almost ahead of myself, too much Rockefeller. If I had to name the leading Gadiantons in this country, I wouldn't name the Rockefellers, I'd just tell you that's who they are. Well, we're down to what you can do. Study true sources. What should you believe? Beware of the press and television. Don't believe of half of what you see, and it is so hard. When you see a story there, you say, well, it must have happened. There are pictures showing it. Now, that may be true on many local events, enough to make things, but on national events, they print what they want you to believe. And same way on television. These television announcers get up there and read the news that's handed to them, and these are the great announcers that know everything. You know, they get out of their car, come in and move place. Where's my news? Oh, I'm reading, and I won't mention, but you know the famous. And one of the most famous newspaper announcers, worked out of New York for years, recently announced that he has been a communist all the time, and he absconded to Venezuela. How do you like that for feeding you the truth? And do you think that the newspaper didn't know that they were being fed? Now, they may not have known his communist connections. If they couldn't tell it after a while, they're not very smart. But at any rate, that represents our news. Now, the next great thing is what they don't print. And I have examples of that. I may come to them later. Now, here's the part you wish you hadn't come for. To ignore truth is civic irresponsibility and cowardice. That leads to worse distortions of our constitutional system. The American people must clean up the federal government or suffer the consequences of slavery, because the officials do not do it. They hate the Constitution because it binds them down, except that they've learned how to evade it and get around it and misuse it. But politicians basically proclaim their loyalty to the Constitution, but they don't like the restrictions upon their actions. Congressmen don't like being restricted from voting pork funds to their local district so they can get elected. There are many things they don't like about it. So the Constitution was made by the people. It belongs to the people. and it will either live or die according to what the people do or don't do. Ezra Taft Benson again. His many books, God, Family, and Country, and the Enemy Hath Done This, this book and several others in which he has told the people how to do it and pleaded with them to do it, and he closed it with this: to the patriot I say, take that long, eternal look. Stand for freedom no matter what the cost. It can save your soul and maybe your country. I like that quotation because I've had it for many years when I think, are you wasting your time? You're battling all of these things. I have here a list of some of the programs I've worked on in the last 60 years. But never at a time, only at one time, the only time that I was ever to give up is when we sat here in this room trying to raise a few dollars to fight the property tax, and not one of us raised a dime. And I went to bed absolutely sick, the first time in my life that I ever thought of quitting. And I guess I would have quit. But Vernon Nichols walked in the next day and financed the fight against the property tax, and we won it. And I'm back. We could just leave this stand now. You've seen it enough, but I still insist. And did you notice in conference that President Hinckley referred to the little stone rolling down that'll fill the whole earth? He was referring to the kingdom of God, and we're referring to the Constitution of the United States because there are two little stones rolling down that same mountain. We're in a terrible battle with our own right now, just as the saints were when they were driven out of the United States, but we will win. I showed you this chart once before. I don't know whether you remember, but the population is generally find themselves in various categories. Now, in the beginning, statesmen who put the well-being of their country ahead of party, person, advantage or anything. They were the great men, the founders, and many that we don't know the names of, but there were many patriotic people in the early days of our country, many down through the years. They used to have great 4th of July celebrations and program during the year. They supported good government. They were a great and mighty people, and I call them statesmen. And then there were active knowledge of people who did not hold government positions, but they supported and they knew and they believed and they prayed and they worked. Then there were many people who were loyal. They didn't know much about it, but they went along because most of their neighbors did, and so they were, if not an active influence, they at least were supportive and were not an opposing one. And then we come down to the zealous but deceived, those dear and sincere people who want to do good. Oh, they just want to do everything good for you. The city council probably is the worst, but on the state and national and county levels, they all want programs that will do good for you and get them reelected, but and they're sincere because they believe. Now, maybe once in a while they stop and say, well, yeah, we need it. But most of the time, and some of our most active city councilmen, especially in the last 20 years, and lesser in the legislature, but some, and to a great extent above. But the Founding Fathers said the local governments are the most dangerous of all. The national governments have restrictions, and they do things when they get into national health programs and national Social Security programs and other things, all of which are wrong at the beginning and have the seeds of their own destruction and will result in doing worse than if they hadn't existed trying to do good. All of their programs eventually cause more harm than good. Their housing program, their urban renewal programs, every program they have starts out to do good for people, but because it's based on the wrong principle of force, compulsion, of telling you what you will eat and what you will do with your money, control your credit and everything you have. It's force just like that, the police power. And for that reason, it is entropy. It contains the seeds of its own destruction. Governor Romney, the previous Governor Romney, was so efficient in running his company, General Motors. Yeah, he was head of General Motors. So efficient that he was called in the government to run their housing program. They had just passed a program to create public housing in all the slums of the city. We're going to clean up those slums. We're going to help those poor people that don't have housing by putting this program in where we put in money for materials and contractors, and this great efficient man will be running the program. And he took it on with great zeal, and he worked that program and he built them in cities, and finally he realized that it would not work. He resigned his position and said, it will not work. It'll be worse than if we didn't do it. Well, what happened? All right, we have all this public housing. Because it's free, people don't take care of it. People move in, and pretty soon they break the doors here, the windows here, smash here. Pretty soon they are a bunch of junk all over the cities. Every city has a bunch of junk in the middle of it. Worse than if they hadn't started. Every government program, to one extent or another, is worse at the end than if they hadn't started it. So if you have any chance to oppose or disapprove of any federal program to provide, wipe it out. Now, the ignorant and apathetic masses were not masses in those days. The plowboys of New England who couldn't go to school except in the winter when they weren't working knew more about the Constitution than most of the people in college or government today. The Constitution was well understood. They knew what it was, and the people were active. Nearly all people used to vote. Huge turnouts at the polls. We got down where we have 18–20%. And that's good because most of them wouldn't know how to vote. Anyway, they said, we try to build up. Get out and vote. It doesn't matter how you vote. Just vote. Now, how silly is that? My ignorant vote cancels your wise vote, and better that I'd stayed home. That way I automatically vote with the majority because my vote goes with the majority, good or bad. Now, if it's good, well then I voted for something good. If it's bad, I'm responsible for voting for something bad. All right, well today it's changed. Now the number of statesmen, I have very few because I was thinking only of the federal government, and there are probably not 30 members of Congress who know up from down or care about the Constitution, who do not violate it almost every time they vote or act. And you've seen this book by Congressman Bob Barr, The Meaning of Is. All right, now you think that this is about that sordid, immoral act of a president of the United States, so ugly that you don't even think. He only treats that a little bit. His great concern is with the many things that man did against our country, and I might as well admit now that selling things to China was one of them. Yeah. But I won't go through it, but page after page, chapter after chapter, he could overlook that immoral thing, just wipe it away. You know, president can do that. But for a president to do this, and then this man led the impeachment in the House, and he had a terrible time. He could hardly get members of the House to go, oh, don't do that, Bob. we'll be in trouble with the president. Don't, you know. He had to work a long time and finally got the last vote to pass impeachment. All right, the House impeached the man, which means they, like a jury, they found reason that he should be tried. The Senate tries the impeachment. All right, the Senate has a committee to receive the information on impeachment from the House and act on it, but they would not allow the man who led it to serve on that committee. He went before them and told them, no, we don't want you, we want somebody else. And so the Senate committee piddled around this and that and the other thing and found no cause for impeachment. Now that's the way the top statesmen, here's one of the top statesmen, Tom Tancredo of Ron Paul of Texas. This man tells how congressmen are taken over by the establishment. Some of you may remember that I ran for Congress, and I won in Mesa where I was known, and because I had $6,700 to spend, and my opponent, the Speaker of the House, the most powerful man in Congress, spent $161,000, and he beat me all over this county except in Mesa. But I didn't want to go to Congress and was so happy that I didn't have to. Now, he explains, Louis, if you've been elected, you go back there and they greet you. Congratulations, Mr. Stradling. You're going to like it fine here, and we're going to work with you. Now, as long as you do what you're told, we're going to support you and give you everything you want, you be re-elected. But if you don't do the vital things that we tell you are necessary, you are going to be disgraced and out of here. Now, they don't say it in plain words like that, but they don't let you misunderstand their meaning. And I've seen that. In fact, I've seen great, patriotic, wise people go back to Congress, and pretty soon they're on the other side, because they find something in their life, some little thing that they can hold against them if they don't yield. So, Stradling, you can be elected time and again, and we're not going to tell anybody about the popsicle you stole when you were 12, because they know about it. As soon as a person is elected to Congress, or even maybe when he's running, they send people wherever he lived, right down to his birthplace, to see if anybody knows anything bad about him. Now, that happened to Governor Evan Mecham. They sent people up to Colorado while he was a child, and they came back with some little thing that they said he did was wrong. And they built that up and built it up. They impeached him and removed him from office on a charge in which he was being tried in court, and which he was found not guilty in court. That man was impeached on a charge which he was found not guilty in court. And he's written a book about it, just to tell you what this government does, because he had discovered the powers that were controlling our legislature. The dog racing gambling interests were very, very powerful. And he beat the man in the election, the man, one of the most powerful members of our legislature, been for years, and he beat him in the election to the amazement of everybody. And that man was so angry, he did everything he could to destroy Evan Mecham. And so that's the way government works. I'd like to close this last session with the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag, and I wonder, would Aaron lead us in that again?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Aaron. Every way, and it's provable in every way, but the fight against it is so strong, and the media is just right in there. The fight against it is a great lesson itself. I could just show you every way in which they fight against it. Here's one: what you should know about the hazards of nuclear power. The federal government spread this all over the United States, warning us that these nuclear power plants could blow up at any time and destroy the city. We have, can't remember his name, the famous promoter of opposition nuclear power. He goes before Congress committees and makes great alarming statements, and they publish things in papers. They had a huge picture of a great atomic bomb going up, and Detroit there said, "We almost lost Detroit." There's a little nuclear plant a few miles from Detroit, and it had some little thing wrong with it, like any business has a nut or bolt come loose or something break, and they fix it and go on, and something happened. And any little thing like that, they seize on it and blow it up, and said if they hadn't have managed to stop it, Detroit would have been wiped out. And any time now, the one we have out here in Arizona had been shut down for several months because there was a leak in one of the water pipes. A leak in a water pipe. And immediately federal inspectors are out. They shut it down, not only to fix the leak in the water pipe, to examine everything else to see if there's anything wrong with it. And for a long time, they were shut down. The Salt River Project had to buy their power, and there's nothing in the paper said it cost the utility users $7.5 million for them to buy power while they were fixing whatever. And so much of it is absolutely, but the important thing to know is that these plants do not have the power to make a nuclear bomb. They do not have the mechanisms and the materials to do it. There's no way on earth any of them could explode. But the prevention measures that the federal government has forced upon them cost billions of dollars. Now, these little power plants are not so great. France has got little power plants, nuclear plants all over the place. India is building them now. Another country, forgotten there, they're now building these little power plants. They don't cost a lot. And if they would allow these plants to be built around each major city, the power would be so extensive that you wouldn't even meter it in your home. They would just run it into your home, and you'd probably pay $25 a month or something for your electricity. For all you do, run your refrigerators or everything. The great profit would come from lighting great streetways and parkways and public and machinery that it would operate. They would make all the money they need from that. But they have this huge reactor up there that creates this electricity, and then they have a stage here that if it should fall here, they have a way to stop it here, and 3 more steps to protect it, prevent it from blowing up or doing anything other. All it can do is sink down into a deep hole in the earth. That's all it can do under any circumstance. And they're protected all the way down. And down in the earth, no matter what it did, it would not affect things. It is the safest form of power ever created to date. All right? Now the fact that we don't do it, what does that cost us? Well, there's hardly a week goes by that you don't read something like this. Explosion in Chinese coal mine kills 203. There has never been one person killed in a nuclear accident, in a nuclear plant. Not one. There have been injuries where somebody hits his finger with a hammer or something, but no injuries other than operation of business. Leaking propane fuel, fatal blast in West Virginia, explosion. The Union blames friction for a mine blast that kills 12. 2 West Virginia coal miners killed in roof collapse. And I had many, I just picked a few. almost every week someplace somebody is killed. A gasoline truck turns over, people are killed. All kinds of explosions in little plants. They accept them just as the price of electricity. They don't think anything about it. They don't send government inspectors rushing in and checking all the things as they do in nuclear plants. So I'm just giving you some of the aspects of it. Now, I'm not saying that we can do without coal or gasoline or so forth. I'm saying that the electricity that would replace much of that would save much of that. But even if we didn't do it without it, why, it shows a difference between the safety. This is just more about our plant here. Palo Verde safety rating lowered because they had a leaking water pipe. The government comes in and says their safety, instead of being 5x, gets down to 4x. And if it keeps dropping, it'd be way down. If it dropped 100, it might be as dangerous as a gasoline plant. Now then, here's the next thing. Now, because we're short of power, great shortage of power, different places in our country, not only because of storm interruptions, because there's actually a shortage of power. The power grids borrow from each other when there's great use of power, great machinery, or in the summer when everybody's running air conditioners. Why, you have to borrow power from this upper Washington State or someplace. And so they're constantly trying to find other sources of power. It says our state lags the nation in using renewable energy sources. That we ought to find some way to make gasoline out of corn or do something to supply the electricity. And Arizona's not doing that. Very bad. Making energy, government incentives would help. If you'd pay some of these people, they might work a little harder to develop other means of power. Apache Junction, to get a solar energy boost, they're going to spend, I don't know, it's a lot of money trying to get a different form of energy out in there. And what are different forms of energy? Well, roof panels. Is that wonderful? You put these panels up there. Now, if you cover your whole roof on the sunny side, why, you could get enough electricity occasionally to make up for part of the electricity you need. And would it be cheaper? What do you think it costs to put those on there? What do you think it costs to clean them off when they get dusty? How many accidents you think will happen to men on slippery roads? Now, because they can't put enough on houses, well, in California and Arizona, they've taken great fields and put in panels, sun electric panels, which do add some to the amount of electricity. Not a great deal, because the sun doesn't shine every day. Now, in Southern California and Arizona it does, but most parts of the country it doesn't shine enough that it would pay. But it doesn't pay for itself here. It has to have government subsidies to make it operate. So the government, instead of letting you have cheap nuclear power, is taxing you to put these things out on the desert. Right? Now they're tackling fossil fuel projects. They're trying to make electricity out of everything they can think of. And always it requires government subsidies to carry on the experiments. Oh, now we have hope for hydrogen. They now think that by going deep into the ground and bringing up hydrogen, they can make an electricity. But they admit that the electricity would cost 4 times as much as the electricity that they generate at these power plants. But in order that it might become cheaper through the years, why, the government should subsidize all because they won't let us have nuclear power. Metric madness. Anything wrong with metric measurement? No? Metric is an excellent measurement, but inches, feet, yards, pounds, ounces, gallons are much better in many, many ways than 3/10,000ths of a meter here and there. And yet the government has passed a law requiring metric measurements in all many chemical and many physical things. So if you look on many products and look on the back, it has standard measure and metric measure. And now when you get a ruler, it has metric on one side and standard on the other side, in inches. Now, what does it cost to do all of that? Well, what you read on that product, you pay for in the price of the product, because they don't do it for free. So more and more the cost of the foolishness of government. Now, it's not, you say, well, why government do it then? It's because of part of the movement into the United Nations, because many other nations use the metric system. And so they are insisting that the United States, to fit into the United Nations, use the metric system. I could have a whole lesson on propaganda, and you may say, well, why? We know what propaganda is. But I doubt if you know how thoroughly communist, socialist propaganda has been woven into our school texts and programs, and exactly how it was done for years. Many teachers don't recognize it, but propaganda involves the clever use of words. Words have several meanings, don't they? Like bear. What's bear mean? An animal running out here. It means bear your burden. Many things that bear means spelled the other way, and it means you didn't have any clothes on. But many words have different meanings, and many monetary terms have different meanings, and when people don't understand them, they are at the mercy of the people who use them. The great deceit, social pseudosciences. I've shown you the picture of the wolf in sheep's clothing. I had a large one here. The socialist organization in Great Britain, that big university, remember the name? For years, they promoted falsely. They had this on their big plate glass things, but they were not telling the world, we're selling you socialism, but they were Rhodes Institute. They were selecting the finest students in America and taking them over for Rhodes scholarships. You ever heard of that? Rhodes Scholarship, one of the highest education prizes that can ever be had. And they take the sharpest political young people out, take them over, and send them back to hold offices and become judges. We had a senator or something in Missouri for 30 years who frankly said the Constitution is a scrap of paper, we should ignore it or throw it out. And 6 times as a senator he swore to defend and uphold it. Meaningless to him, meant nothing to him. But some of our judges have been Rhodes Scholars. They have no problem at all telling that you can't have God or Bible reading in school. These people come back convinced that socialism is the great, wise means of government. They're pretty thorough now. I'm not sure that they convert everybody, but most of them, most Rhodes Scholars, are on the wrong side of the political fence. I have ridicule here. They point out that one of the most effective political tools, when you don't have the truth, use ridicule on your opponent. When I opposed fluoridation, the newspapers and television attacked me as an insane man. I wish I could show you that one I had here, and I may come to it. But here is a man who helped write the Charter of Mesa. He served 10 years on the council. He served on the legislative committee. He served on the Maricopa Charter Committee. He ran a manager of business with 120 employees, furnishing employment. He was active in his church. He and his wife reared 14 children. The only one of whom was in prison was one who was teaching people in prison about the Constitution. And yet this man suddenly has become an insane idiot. And they just attack me of every possible way. I have my joke book collection of it. But at any rate, the use of words to deceive is amazing. I don't know whether I had it or not. I've just been working day and night trying to put all these things together. I have so many notes I can't refer to them. I'm trying to give you a picture of what you would have had if you'd been here 3 hours instead of an hour and a half. NRA's mean lie. The National Rifle Association has saved our lives in fighting against taking guns away. But this NRA came out pretty strongly. The newspapers attacked them. But here, according to NRA, the ideal American family is a 6-year-old boy that carries a gun to school. And here is an official, and every official should carry a gun wherever he goes, and every housewife should have a gun in her purse or strapped to her, and even little children, little girls should have a gun on them. And for safety's sake, they should tie one to the dog's tail so if they need one. How ridiculous, but again, ridicule is more powerful than open opposition, and they love to use it. When I opposed the Civilian Police Review Board in Mesa, the same thing. Suddenly, this man is crazy. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He's found some old junky stuff, and he's making a thing out of it, and he has no idea what he's talking about. Probably know as much about fluoridation as anybody in this country. I studied it for 50 years, and I could tell you for one thing, there is not one benefit from fluoridation. All the claims that it helps children's teeth, prevents tooth decay, and even helps older people, that it's one of the 10 most important medical advances of the century. The great publicity they give it. Fluoride hurts a tooth the first time it touches it. It begins a hardening of the enamel, which at first gives the appearance that it's improving the tooth, because it's evident to the dentist that the enamel is hardening. But that is just the beginning of fluorosis, which is a deterioration of the tooth. Little white specks, and then more, and then more so. Then they say, well, those white specks are just cosmetic. There's no harm to them. But they say over and again, it's just cosmetic. They're just as pretty as white teeth. You don't have to have white teeth. Well, people who were born in some of these heavy fluoride areas, 8 miles east of Mesa, where my mother was born and my wife were born, and both of them had brown, cracked teeth from too much fluoride. And both of them had to have constant dental care. That's what fluoridation will do. But in addition to that, fluoride seizes on calcium. The fluoride ion is one of the most powerful. It is one of the 5th most dangerous chemicals known to man, along with arsenic and the other 4. But it is extremely dangerous. It is so dangerous that a spoonful of it would kill a person instantly like that. Even to absorb it is dangerous. That is so dangerous that to have fluoridation, the city of Mesa had to have a huge 3-inch rubber-lined tank. But in case it should eat through that rubber, it would eat through the metal just like that. Therefore, they have to have an interior 3-inch double-lined rubber. In case it gives out, the other one will catch it. Isn't that great? Is it safe? And they say fluoridation is the safest way of treating tooth. I have a picture here of a huge semi-tanker rubber lined, loaded with this hydrofluoric silicic acid that it gets out of the fertilizer plant in Florida, and it's rolling up through Florida in the middle of the night, and the acid eats through the rubber and eats the tail wheels off the tank, and it crashes and spills that whole load of hundreds of thousands of gallons 600 feet down the street. It eats the pavement up as it hits. They had to stop traffic in the middle of the night on both sides and not let them through. They had to evacuate people from their homes for a mile around because the fumes are so dangerous. Now that's the safe product for your children's teeth. And yet, do you ever read that in the paper? Well, now that was printed in a Florida paper, and the local Florida paper printed it. I don't know of any other paper in the United States that printed it. Now, because I'm in touch with fluoride opposition organizations in Florida and in New York and in Southern California and in Washington, that I get exchanges of information, have for many, many years. And I've given you the name of one of them here in case you would like to receive some of their literature. They have emails all the time on new discoveries of the danger of fluoride. But this truck picture, I blew one up that big and had a chart here on my lecture on fluoridation. Now Mesa had a spill. 500 gallons of it leaked out into the ground. They had to shut down everything all around. They had to dig it out deep and haul it to a hazardous waste dump. But the only article in the paper was a little article that big back on page 12. Mesa had them. They can't say, you can't say we didn't publicize it. We publicized it. Go back to page 12. That's on, I have a copy of that article. Well, I can spend too much time on fluoridation, but I have been the greatest opponent of fluoridation in the Arizona for years, and I was still on it because of the condition of which I told you. I will resign from my position as chairman of it and make my last final witness to the city council that every day you let this run into the people's body of Mesa, you are exposing them to danger to thyroid, their bones, and that's up to you. But before God, I witness to you that what I've said is true. That's my final letter to them. The Rockefellers, the Federal Reserve Corporation, which they created and operate, the exposition of these, Congressman Louis T. McFadden presented this in Congress in 1934, an astounding exposure explaining exactly how the federal government has taken over our credit, our money, and turned it over to a private bank. And they put the name federal on it to make it sound like it's a government bank. And then, because of the many objections exposing that it was a private bank, that the government turned over to it the power to print our money. And you remember I showed you that big worthless piece of paper represent $1, nothing else but $1. The power, and to sell that money to the United States to distribute to the banks. Now, how crazy can that be? Well, there's much opposition that the Congress has passed several acts making the chairman of the board a government officer, making the bank a government institution. So now you say, well, it is a federal, it is a government thing, but it is hypocritical and as dangerous. I can't begin to explain in the 4 minutes I have left the many evils that it affects your banking, your credit, and the money that the Rockefellers who control this make in interest off your deposits. How much interest do you get? Half of 1%, 20 cents a month. But they make money on the interest that the bank gets from lending money, and they control them. The Rockefellers control so many things that they practically control the United States. almost any way you want to. The urban renewal, I had a book on that. 1313 East Washington, an institution in Chicago, great big building in which they create associations of mayors, national associations of chief of police, national association of city councilmen, national associations of school teachers, all these national associations. Now, when I was on the council, I said, well, you ought to go back to the National Association of City Councilmen. It's in New Orleans this year. You could get seen, and your tickets paid. Mesa taxpayers pay for my. I refused to go. Year after year, I refused to go. I said they're an unconstitutional organization. They are a bad influence. They get all these people together. They pass a resolution to Congress. They go to these conventions. I went to one. The mayor said, Louis, you've never been to one. How can you talk against them? I insist that you go to this one. I said, I will go. I will pay my way. And I went. And, well, they welcome you there, and then they give you all sorts of golf things and sightseeing and everything while they sit in conference and pass the resolutions that they want to come back and say, all the city councilmen passed this resolution to Congress that we want so-and-so. How's that for manipulation? I went to the one in Hawaii one year. It was on, I've forgotten the subject, it was on a subject that I was responsible for in the city. And I took my wife Eleanor, and we had a wonderful vacation over there, but I went to the meetings. And I participated, and I made my explanations, and I brought home the material as it applied to the thing over which I was chairman in Mesa. So that's my experience of the Rockefellers. There's the Blame Metro when they took over the, as I told you, building houses in the slum areas of the city, cleaning up the cities, and building all these city organizations and they have county organizations and state legislatures. Nearly anybody in government can get to go to free vacation, free paid for by the taxpayers at some association of which they're a member. The rest of this book is just a tragedy. It makes me sick to read it, the extent at which they control almost everything. Helaman Section 3, the Gadiantons took over sole management of the movement. And at a time when the church was prospering, they were baptizing by the thousand, the tens of thousands. Even the leaders of the church did not recognize the Gadiantons. They walked among them, went to church, they played golf, they did this, they did this. Nobody recognized them except by their actions. Now, if Louis had been there, he would have known who they were. I don't mean to be boastful. I mean, I've studied these things to the depth for 60 years, and that's because I'm a citizen. I have a responsibility for whatever I can do in my limited resource and influence. And how far my influence goes, I don't know. But I continue to find people that, well, I took his Constitution course. Well, I've given you a number of things. For example, freedom for economic education. President J. Reuben Clark was one of the organizers of this thing way back when, and I have been a member of it almost ever since it was organized. Much of their stuff is free, and they're on the internet. You can get a great deal of stuff. Now they have one in the internet right now, which is a joke. It takes a recent government action and makes a joke out of it to show how silly it is. But I have it on my internet and check it every day or two. They're the one that published the law, and you can buy it from them. But many of their publications that I've studied for many years have been very helpful to me in what I've learned. One of the reasons for hope is that we defeated the Equal Rights Amendment but they are bringing it up again. And if the Equal Rights Amendment passes, the family is destroyed, because the Equal Rights Amendment does not have one word of sex, male or female, man or woman, boy or girl. Every person in America comes under it, and it means that if it passes, when they have a compulsory draft, they take everybody. It doesn't matter how many children she has, mother, it doesn't matter any place. The women go right to battle along with the men, and they cannot discriminate where they put them. Right now we have women in the Air Force, and they do not put them in combat. In the Army, they do not put them in combat. They put them in supportive, and they're very helpful. We have some great women serving the Army, but they do it voluntarily. And now we have some that are in Iraq who never dreamed they'd be there, mothers of children who joined the Army because they had a clerical position in Mesa, Arizona. And they thought that all they were doing was getting a job, a nice job that they'd support their children. And suddenly the Army has drafted the National Guard of Arizona to serve in Iraq, and she's over in Iraq. Now, that will happen. Women will be out digging the ditches and fixing the roads. The children will not belong to their parents. It's a total destruction of the family. And I fought that. Oh, how I fought that for years. And the story of how we beat that in Arizona by one vote in the House, and later the joint vote of the House and Senate together, the last state that could have passed it. All other, see, it was set out for 7 years. All constitutional amendments set out for 7 years. In 7 years, it did not have the required number of states. There were 30 states that ratified just like that. Oh, this is a wonderful thing for women. We're going to do this. Men felt they should do it for women. Women thought it was going to emancipate them. 30 states, just like that, until suddenly I called attention. I went to the Arizona legislature. I said, do you know what this says? Well, if you know. I said, have you read Section 2? I'm in the committee. I said, no. I said, the Congress shall have power to enforce this, taking away from the state everything regarding marriage, children, everything. Wiped it out. Goes Senator Gist, a big, powerful senator, stood up, said, well, I'll oppose it. He was going to vote for it. And so they took it back to the Arizona legislature, and they took it out of committee. All right, we went along year after year. 7 years passed, and the Congress added 2.5 more years. I just was so weary, but I had to go to work again. All right, we come down to the last 2 states. Every other state had adjourned for the year. They would not be considered. They needed 2 states. If one state would pass, the other would jump on quickly to be the one that passed it. So between Michigan and Arizona, and Michigan was just holding off, waiting German. Came down to Arizona. Phyllis Schlafly came here, a powerful lawyer, beautiful, wonderful woman, to speak against it. And Louis Stradling put in his paper to speak against it. And the head of the legislature, are you an attorney? No. Sit down, we don't want to hear from you. Are there any attorneys here? So attorney stood up. Do you understand this thing? No, no. Mr. Stradling, come on back up. And we made the speech, and by one vote, Arizona turned it down, and the ERA was dead all over the United States. Now, that's a chapter in my history that got a lot of things I haven't told you. But we worked day and night at one time in order to meet a deadline of getting papers out to 100,000 women all over Arizona. So it was. I worked at that printing press for 24 hours. My wife brought me lunch, and I'd eat it. I was printing. I'd stop by and go to the bathroom. For 24 hours, I ran that printer. We had 15 or 20 women come up to our meeting room upstairs, They brought their babies, they laid them there. They assembled these papers like this all day long. They took them out and they got them distributed all over Arizona, and we got the opposition to the Equal Rights Amendment. Now, I could tell you many things we did. That was one of the greatest fights of my life. Now they're bringing it back in. Now they're bringing it back in. See, an amendment of the Constitution has to be sent out by the Congress. Now they're saying that under the juridical principle of interposition, which is the state's right to refuse to obey an order of the Congress or of a court, Nevada is now challenging the federal government on the 75% of Nevada that it has taken for public land, because Nevada hardly has enough land to get on. So they now have a case in court challenging that on several bases, and they've got a good case. I looked at it, and I could add a little to their case, but not much. They're good. But one of them is the equal rights and privileges. We have many eastern states, the government doesn't own an acre, a lot. They don't own anything. And on the Constitution provision that the federal government may own such property as purchased from the states for docks, arsenals, airports, and things necessary defense. Nothing else. All these national parks, all these properties, Arizona, nearly 70% of Arizona belongs to the federal government. Nearly all of it would belong back in the states. The states could use that land for commercial, other purposes, you know. So the poor old Constitution hangs by a thread. But the first time I saw it in the paper, I called my senator and my representative immediately. And I said, "Did you see this?" "No." I said, "Well, look in the paper and see it. It's back." And both of them said, "We will stop this immediately. We will kill it committee. We'll never let it come to the floor." Actions in our city and state that are contrary to the Constitution, or there are things that are going in our state on which you could work. For example, this immigration thing, the state is trying desperately to stop this NAFTA, the National Trade Association, where they open the borders to Mexican and Canadian trucks. These Mexican breaking down trucks come in with all sorts of produce and stop them. But there's great effort in our state and other states to stop it, and sometimes it's just a phone call. They give you the names of people and an email or a phone call letting them know of your position on it. So it contains many things we do, and one thing it does contain, the New American that I've showed you several times since I've subscribed to it since 50 years ago, 1961, when it was called One Man's Opinion, and then it was called Review of the News, and then it was changed and finally called The New American. But I have subscription slips here for anybody that might be interested, and I want to tell you that through the years I have learned more accurately what is going on in this country than from any other source. Very seldom have I disagreed because I knew something they didn't know, and sometimes I'll send information. So they're up for grabs if you want them. All right, class dismissed.